know it's been a long day and you probably want some lunch. I really appreciate your patience today. I wanted to end with some ideas and constructive ideas, which is why we're doing this hearing, and how we can best do that. And any of you can take this, but this is just based on all of the experience you've had. We have a unique situation here at the Capitol where the chief is reporting to this police review board. General Walker, may be most familiar with it, but they're reporting to the sergeant at arms, the two sergeants of arms, and the architect of the Capitol. It's three of them. And in fact, just today, Senator Schumer announced a new sergeant at arms, Karen Gibson, while you guys were sitting there. And so there is something about the structure which may work for requesting resources or making decisions, but certainly didn't work in this context where the chief, the then Chief Sund, was leading up to it, asking them, probably not able to do exactly what he may have wanted to do at the time. And then the most ridiculous of situations during the insurrection is actually calling them for their advice and authority while they are individually guarding the members and safely getting them to other places in this crisis situation. And just your views on whether or not that is an ideal situation. This is called a softball, General Walker. That is whether or not this is a ideal situation, and maybe Ms. Sanborn, for trying to make decisions in a crisis as we look at changes that we can suggest and make here at the Capitol.
So the Sergeant of Arms, both of them, were briefed by me personally in 2018 on what it takes to request District of Columbia National Guard support. I sat down with both Sergeant of Arms, myself and Brigadier General Dean and others in their office, and explained the six-step process and left them with a PowerPoint presentation. I also briefed Chief Sund and his predecessor. I had them come to the Armory and explain in detail what it takes if you ever need District of Columbia National Guard support. What I think might be helpful in the future is that is practice, that you come up with an event, will we need District of Columbia National Guard support? You pick a day and say, and then we exercise it. And then have the District of Columbia National Guard actually come out in an exercise. Here's where we would go. Here's how we would support the United States Capitol Police. But both sergeants of arms understood what it takes to request District of Columbia National Guard support.
Mr. Salas, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I do. I work on a regular basis with the Capitol Police Board. I just met with the new team on Monday, in fact. The challenge, quite candidly, is in contingency operations and contingency events, there really needs to be one person in charge making decisions. That to have four people that have to either agree or come together and have the same, I just don't think it's a very workable solution. I also deal with all the Capitol Police requests that come to the Defense Department. Normally, we get the request actually at the last minute most of the time, because it takes all four of them to sign the document to give us the request. For example, right now we have the National Guard on the Capitol today. It's supposed to end on the 12th. We're trying to figure out with the Capitol Police Board what's going to happen after the 12th. We need an answer in the Defense Department so that we understand.
Exactly.
So the Secretary can review and make a decision on how that support will either be continued or adjusted.
Very good. I would agree with that.
I just would like to add something else, Senator,
Sure.
if I could. I do think that all of us now, because of the unique environment that we're in, as we talked about extremism, I know we talked a lot about intelligence assessments and those types of things, and they're critical to this effort, really being able to predict. But I think we also need to anticipate, and when we see large crowds gathering in the National Capital Region. They're all permitted by the Park Police, so we know when they're going to be here. We need to do a better job anticipating that kind of activity so that we think about the most likely and most dangerous scenarios that we face. With that, we need to plan together, we need to train together, we need to exercise together. and we need to have an integrated security plan here for the NCR. As I mentioned in my opening statement about the number of law enforcement organizations that we have here in the NCR and the different jurisdictional responsibilities, we need to bring them together so we know how that we're going to operate in these complex environments that we're facing right now. And then we need to understand the critical capabilities that each of us can bring to that. And we need to make sure that we have prearranged agreements to provide those capabilities in a timely fashion. The challenge is when you start from zero and you're faced with the challenges that we were faced on the 6th collectively, that's a very difficult position to start from. So I think if we work at some of those things, I think we can be much more effective. And the Department of Defense really looks forward to working with people on that.
Yes, and I had a very good meeting with the head of the Joint Chiefs. He actually gave one of the highest civilian honors to one of our heroes here, and I was able to talk with him about this. And I think that this is a moment. I thought that that Ms. Sandberg said it best when she said she's always learned and improved, and it's hard to do that in an environment like this, and I know it's not easy. We ask these questions, especially when people think, well, yeah, okay, maybe we messed up this part of it, but how about those guys? But we know there's things that can be done better, and so I really appreciate that. I don't know if the two of you want to add anything to my question, and that'll be it for me.
Nothing to add, ma'am.
Okay.
No,
Ms.
nothing.
Moza? Okay, very good.
Well, once again, I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us here today. This was a very long hearing. I appreciate your perseverance in dealing with certainly a number of very tough questions, and we all appreciate your answers. There's no question from what I've been hearing over these last two hearings is that there was serious breakdowns in our intelligence gathering and security planning that resulted in significant violence right here on the Capitol grounds. The 3-hour and 19-minute delay in authorizing the deployment of the National Guard to respond to the Capitol to quell the violence was one that left police, members of Congress, staff, and the public in danger and is, without question, completely unacceptable. The breakdown in communication and the chain of command within the Department of Defense that contributed to this delay, a stark difference from the Department of Defense's response during the summer protest, is concerning and should never, ever happen again. I remain concerned that our national security agencies are simply not adequately focused on domestic terrorism, which we all agree is the #1 terrorist threat to our homeland. The potential for violence was well known and widely disseminated all across social media platforms in the days leading up to January 6th. Yet the very agencies responsible for monitoring and evaluating those threats failed to utilize every investigative tool to gather the readily available intelligence warnings of violence and have failed to assess this intelligence. The intelligence community's failure directly contributed to the law enforcement's inadequate preparation on January 6th. And I understand the FBI and the DHS's commitment today to doing better in their intelligence collection and monitoring this threat, which I appreciate it. But we need to actually see these improvements. It has to be demonstrated in a meaningful way. It's not enough for agencies to simply promise to do better. Congress must make reforming our counterterrorism efforts a top priority. We need to take a hard look at reforming the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis and requiring both DHS and FBI to provide more concrete information to law enforcement so that they can take actions to protect our communities from this violent and deadly threat. Following today's hearing, I'll continue my investigation and will continue to interview other officials and experts as we work towards additional problems and potential solutions. And I'm committed to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, across multiple committees, to ensure that we're setting policy that will provide the foundation for our national security agencies threat and treat domestic violence threat with the seriousness that it certainly warrants and help protect Americans all across our country. So that, I close, and thank you again, Chairwoman Klobuchar, for working with me on this hearing today.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Peters, and I also thank our ranking members Blunt and Portman. We have done every part of this hearing together and agreed on witnesses and agreed on how we were going to proceed. We felt that was very, very important. This is a political environment enough without politicizing this, and we have tried our best to be constructive. Now we've had 2 hearings, and we all know we've had some consensus on many things. We've had consensus from our witnesses that there is significant evidence that there was an element of this that was planned and coordinated involving white supremacists and violent extremists, people intent on doing damage, not only just to this building, as we were reminded as we stood on the inaugural stage with now President Biden with still spray paint at the bottom of the columns and still surrounded by what had just happened there only 2 weeks before. They were intent not just on destroying the physical building that we work in, but also our democracy that brought us to that moment. And as an aside, I really was proud of the work that Senator Blunt did in planning that inauguration, but also the work we did that night when at 4 in the morning, it was just the 2 of us and Vice President Pence walking with 2 young pages that had the mahogany box with the remaining ballots in it to go over to the House. People were doing their jobs, just as you do your jobs. And so, as I said earlier, I thought this was best summed up by Ms. Sandberg when she talked about their after actions. When they look at, as I know I did when I was a prosecutor, sometimes with law enforcement, sometimes about cases, sometimes about why a domestic violence case, I mean domestic violence as in the home, got to the point that it did, and we would look back at decisions that had been made. Now, back then, we could do it in rooms just with ourselves, and that's a lot easier than this, and I'm sure you're doing that in your own agencies. But we have a public duty of oversight and a public duty to get this information out, and sometimes around this place, the only way we can get the change and maybe the resources that you need, Ms. Sandberg, that Director Ray was talking about, or the work that you were talking about, the man with the hardest name at this hearing, Salesis, that you were talking about to be able to bring people together that we need to for the planning ahead of time so we don't get to that moment of chaos, not only chaos at the Capitol, but chaos that, of course, General Walker encountered when he was trying to get a decision that day. And so a lot of this is stepping back, planning ahead. I personally think that it's been very difficult during the pandemic for people to meet like they used to meet when they were planning ahead. And thankfully, with the recent announcements we've had, we hope to be through that so people can once again be meeting face-to-face and across jurisdictions. I think that would make a difference. As we look at the changes, which Chairman Peter so well laid out, I think additional ones, again, which I keep harping on, is that the Capitol, the police board, I just think, having been in law enforcement myself, this is just a recipe for disaster to have crisis decisions made by a group of people on the scene or even leading up to it. I also think we know that, as we learned after 9/11, as was pointed out by some of our senators, that you can learn from horrible, horrific events and then do better with sharing intelligence, that maybe old ways that people were getting used to with sending emails or maybe speaking up at a meeting, maybe the right people weren't in that room, or perhaps they're not looking at all the information because they're overloaded, and you have to find a way to triage it so they actually realize something's important. I personally think with everything that went on in the last year, there was some underestimation of the potential violence of these particular groups, which we now know all too well. And I also want to thank everyone involved in law enforcement, not just for keeping us safe that day, but for the work that they are doing all across the country to bring justice to those like Officer Sicknick, who lost his life, and those who were injured in terms of pursuing these cases, some of which are very straightforward, because they put it on their own Facebook page, but some of which are a lot harder to figure out what the coordination is and what happened. So we all know there are still questions coming out of all of this. Again, some of them, I'm sure, very difficult because a lot of people were trying to do their jobs that day and mistakes were made. But we do have to get to the bottom of some of this, at the same time not losing track of our intent. There may be longer investigations that go on all of this, but our intent right now is to make sure that we make smart changes, getting the people in place at the Capitol. Senator Peters and I don't control that, but we can give our advice based on what we hear, and also making those structural changes that can make it easier for you all to do your jobs to keep this country safe and for us to do our jobs as well. So thank you very much. And we will keep the record of this hearing open for 2 weeks, and the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.